Today, we're ranking Tier 1 priest spells for Shadowdark. Find out more today on Runeforged. Hey folks, I'm William. This is Runeforged. Welcome to the channel. I will be ranking each one of those Tier 1 spells, as well as giving my explanation for why I put them in that tier. And as a disclaimer, this is mostly just going to be, personal vibes and, what I've observed in terms of relative spell strength based on my own personal games. So I'm really eager to hear your thoughts on this ranking down in the comments below. But before we get started, I just wanted to briefly explain my rating scale. So anything that I put in the S tier, I'm going to consider to be a pretty broken spell. These are spells that I would be picking up ASAP from my spell list, and they have a pretty consistent ability to quote unquote win an encounter with a single successful cast. A tier spells are also very good, and I would still pick those up ASAP. But they aren't quite as game or encounter breaking as the S tier spells. B tier spells are solid, and they are ones that I would probably consider picking up eventually, but they aren't necessarily my first priority. C tier spells are pretty mediocre, and while in general they're probably fine, there are usually just better options to pick up with your very limited spell selection. Now, D tier spells are truly terrible, and I would never consider spending one of my precious spells known on one of these spells. And I might even be reluctant to use a spell, even if it showed up in the form of a wand or a scroll. There are just better things to use your action on than casting this spell. And I don't think that we're going to see too many of these throughout the course of our spell tier list review. But I did want to have the category there just in case we do run into one of those spells. If you're enjoying this video so far, please consider aiding me in my eternal struggle against the dreaded YouTube algorithm by crushing those like and subscribe buttons so you don't miss out on more exciting content like this in the future. Also, if you'd like to support the channel, please consider checking out my Runeforged Tabletop Gaming page on RPG, where I have published several different adventures and other supplements, largely for Shadowdark. My most recent adventure is Wicked Witch of the Woods, a level 1 dark fairy tale adventure that I think would be really great to run as a one-shot this Halloween. It is designed to scale pretty easily for anywhere between 1 and 6 players, and is also designed to fit in a session that can be as little as 2 hours or as long as 4. So again, hopefully just the right amount of time to run as a one-shot. If you'd like to pick up a copy for yourself, there will be a link to do so down in the video description. And finally, I'd like to give a quick shout out to our very first YouTube channel member, which is Justin Smith. Justin, I just want to say thank you so much for that support. It really does mean a lot. All right, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the spells themselves. So we're going to go ahead and start with Cure Wounds. This is a very powerful spell, one of the most important things in Shadowdark, aside from having fun while you're playing the game, is making sure that your character stays alive. And Cure Wounds is really good at filling that role. Much better, in fact, than a simple stabilize check from another crawler. Cure Wounds also scales pretty well with level in a way that many other spells do not, and is just fairly universally useful in terms of how spells go. I can't think of very many sessions I can't think of a single session actually where we've ever had where no one took any damage throughout the course of that session. Again, your games may vary and you may have a lot less combat in your games than we do, but for me, Cure Wounds is an excellent spell. And I can't imagine actually having a level 1 priest without the Cure Wounds spell. And if you're someone who doesn't pick this spell up at level 1, I'd be really curious to hear your thought process down in the comments below. I think for me personally, I think that Cure Wounds is definitely an auto pick spell, and I'm going to put it in the A tier. I do think that there is an argument for putting it in S tier, but I don't know if a single cast of the spell is single-handedly winning encounters as often as some of the spells that we are going to eventually be putting in S tier. All right, so next we've got Holy Weapon, and this is a really interesting case because I think in some ways the spell is not as good as it originally kind of looks. And I think in some instances, especially if the priest has a pretty solid attack modifier, the priest may be better off just using their action to perform a standard attack instead. The +1 hit bonus from this spell is actually pretty unlikely to have a meaningful impact on the course of combat, even if the person who is getting buffed with the spell gets to attack, all 5 rounds in a row. And likewise, the +1 damage that you get from the spell is more likely probably to make a difference overall. But there's still plenty of chance that, that additional +1 is not going to be enough to actually finish off the monster or actually reduce the number of hits that it's going to take to destroy it. And there are also many cases where that +1 is going to be wasted as a result of overkill. Situationally, I do think Holy Weapon can be good for the fact that it does make the weapon magical and therefore can bypass some of the monster immunities. Overall, I think this is an okay spell, but there are probably just better choices in tier 1. So I'm going to go ahead and put this into the C tier. So next up, we have the Light Spell, and this is absolutely a very useful spell to have in your arsenal. As many of you know who have played Shadowdark, fighting in the dark is definitely hazardous to your health, so it's important that you always have a light source running in your party. I think some of the spell's value is going to depend a little bit on how often your group ends up running out of torches or light sources during the course of their various different dungeon delves. For me personally, this has never really been a huge issue. With our sessions only being maybe 2 to 3 hours at a time, generally speaking, we're only going through like maybe 2 to 3 torches, maybe upwards of 4. If there's some sort of event or something that is, putting out that light. All right. So again, in our games, maybe not as big a deal as at other tables, but I definitely do still think that there is value in being able to have light while not having one of your hands be occupied by a torch or a lantern. Also, the light spell is generally going to be a lot more reliable than trying to relight a torch in the darkness. And if you're in a situation where you do need to be relighting a torch in the darkness, being able to cast the light spell and get it, not guaranteed necessarily, but have a much higher chance of getting it off the first time you use it, that could definitely be a lifesaver for your party. So I do think this is a very solid spell, and I'm actually going to go ahead and put this in the B tier. It's not necessarily a spell that I would pick up at level 1. But I do think it is very solid, and it's a decent pickup for maybe that third known spell for tier 1. And I think if push came to shove, I could see bumping this up maybe to A tier. But for now, I think we're gonna go ahead and keep it in B. All right, so the next spell that we're looking at is Protection from Evil. Now, this spell is a little bit situational, and they can only be used against foes of chaotic alignment. And it also has some other limitations in the fact that it is a focus spell, and enemy creatures can bypass it by simply choosing to attack a different target. However, situationally, this can be an incredibly powerful spell. Now, just giving disadvantage on attack rolls and spellcasting checks is already huge in its own right, but the fact that it also prevents and dispels like possession, compel, and beguile makes it exceptionally strong in situations when you're fighting against opponents that are using these abilities. Those are some of the abilities in the game that can really swing the tide of a combat with just that one ability, and the fact that you can either be immune to that or dispel that effect on an ally makes this an incredibly useful spell. Now, I will say that the focus component of the spell does make it a little bit unreliable, but it also means that if you get lucky, and especially if you have advantage on casting the spell, you can have a pretty significant amount of uptime for Protection from Evil. Personally, my favorite use of this spell is to put it on an already high armor class ally. Often that's going to be myself as the priest, and then have that character either move in to block like a doorway or a really narrow hallway, or otherwise get into a position where they're really commanding the attention of the enemies in the encounter. And I can tell you firsthand that the amount of damage this spell mitigates can be absolutely insane. And all the while, that character is going to be immune to some of those other nastier crowd controlling effects. So I think for me personally, I'm going to go ahead and put Protection from Evil into the A tier. Next, let's talk a little bit about Shield of Faith. And this one is kind of an interesting comparison to Protection from Evil. In my opinion, I actually think that Shield of Faith is pretty mediocre. I can't really see myself picking it up because there are just so many other better options for tier 1 priest spells. One of the main issues of the spell is it can only be cast on the priest themselves, which really limits the usefulness of the spell. And because the armor class bonus is relatively low, in order to have a pretty good chance of actually having this spell have an effect during the course of an encounter, the person who has it on them needs to take like 10 plus attacks during the 5 rounds in which the spell is active, or else there's a pretty decent chance that the spell is not going to have any effect at all. And I think worse still, as we alluded to earlier, the spell really kind of fills a very similar niche to the Protection from Evil spell. And aside from the fact that it's a little bit less consistent, I think Protection from Evil is just the better spell overall. And if I was going to be forced to choose between these two spells, I would definitely be picking Protection from Evil in a majority of instances. Now, I will say situationally, if you find that your GM is targeting you as the priest a lot with physical attacks from non-chaotic creatures, and you're finding out, and you're seeing this happen a lot during the course of your campaign, maybe there is a fringe argument for picking this spell up and just trying to keep it up on yourself as much as possible. As a result, I think that Shield of Faith lands squarely in the C tier of this tier list. Finally, we have the Turn Undead spell, which is a bit of an unusual case. It is definitely a very situational spell, really only being useful against undead. But against undead, it is an extremely powerful ability. And in my experience, it is one of those spells that will quite consistently just flat out win an encounter with a single successful cast of that spell. The spell also scales fairly well with level, and you can completely obliterate entire hordes of undead equal to the priest level or lower. Also, even though the spell is kind of situational, the fact that you end up getting it for free as part of the priest class really offsets that issue, as it doesn't take up any of your precious spell selections. So in my opinion, according to the way that we laid out this tier list, I think Turn Undead classifies as an S tier spell, insofar as that it very consistently can completely change the tide of a single encounter. All right, so there you go. That is the finalized ranking for the tier 1 priest spells, in my opinion. So for me personally, that means that at level 1 on my priests, I like to pick up Cure Wounds and Protection from Evil, in addition to the Turn Undead spell that you get for free as part of that class. And then I think you have a little bit of leeway to choose between Light, Holy Weapon, and Shield of Faith, kind of as your third and final spell once you level up. I think Light might be the more universally useful spell, but I could definitely see situationally wanting to pick up either Holy Weapon or Shield of Faith instead. If you did enjoy this video, please consider checking out this next video, which I think you might also really enjoy. But yeah, so definitely let me know your thoughts on this video down in the comment section below. In particular, I'm curious to know, do you agree with these rankings? And if you don't, please let me know why. And finally, I'm curious to know if you guys would like to see more videos like this in the future. Personally, I had a lot of fun making this video and kind of thinking through the various different choices, and I hope that you guys enjoy them as well. All right, I think that's about it for now. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.